The ink on the marriage contract had dried 3 weeks before Eleanor Hartwell ever laid eyes on it. And when she finally did, standing in the dusty parlor of her deceased father's ranch house outside Abilene, Kansas, in the spring of 1878, she felt the ground shift beneath her feet like the earth itself had betrayed her. "This cannot be legal," Eleanor said, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands as she held the document up to the afternoon light streaming through the window. The paper was thick, expensive, the kind her father would have used for important business, and there at the bottom sat his signature alongside another name she barely recognized. Clarence Pemberton Roman III, a cattle baron from San Antonio she had met exactly once at a Cattlemen's Association dinner 2 years prior. The lawyer, a thin man named Horace Wiggins with spectacles that kept sliding down his narrow nose, cleared his throat. "I am afraid it is entirely legal, Miss Hartwell. Your father signed this agreement 6 months before his passing. The arrangement states that upon his death you would marry Mr. Pemberton within 60 days to consolidate the ranch holdings. Mr. Pemberton has already begun making arrangements for the wedding, which is scheduled for next month." Eleanor's mind raced. Her father had been sick for months, yes, but she had been by his side nearly every day, and he had never mentioned this arrangement. She had nursed him through fever and delirium, had held his hand as he grew weaker, and not once had he spoken of selling her future to secure some business deal. The betrayal cut deeper than any wound she could have imagined. "I will not do it," she said firmly, setting the document on the desk with more force than necessary. "I will not marry a man I do not know to satisfy some business arrangement I never agreed to." Wiggins pushed his spectacles up again. "Miss Hartwell, I understand your distress, but the contract is binding. If you refuse, Mr. Pemberton has legal grounds to claim the entire ranch as compensation for breach of contract. Your father put up the land as collateral. You would be left with nothing." The ranch had been in her family for 20 years. Her mother was buried on the hill overlooking the creek. Every fence post, every barn board, every acre held memories of her childhood, of learning to ride before she could properly walk, of helping her father drive cattle to market, of becoming the woman she was. The thought of losing it to a stranger made her chest tighten with rage and grief in equal measure. "How long do I have?" she asked. 53 days, Miss Hartwell. I am sorry." After Wiggins left, Eleanor stood alone in the parlor, staring at the contract as though it were a snake coiled to strike. The house felt emptier than it had even in the days following her father's funeral. She was 22 years old, capable of running this ranch as well as any man, and yet with a stroke of a pen, her father had reduced her to property to be traded. The sound of horses outside drew her attention. Through the window, she could see several riders approaching, and her heart sank further when she recognized the lead horse, a massive black stallion that could only belong to one person. Clarence Pemberton had come to inspect his future bride. Eleanor stepped onto the porch as Pemberton dismounted. He was a large man, broad-shouldered and tall, probably in his mid-40s, with a thick mustache and cold gray eyes that assessed her the way one might evaluate livestock at auction. Behind him, 4 ranch hands stayed mounted, watching with expressions that made Eleanor's skin crawl. "Miss Hartwell," Pemberton said, removing his hat with exaggerated courtesy. "I thought it was time we became better acquainted, given that we are to be married in a few short weeks." "I have not agreed to anything," Eleanor said, keeping her voice level despite the anger simmering beneath her words. Pemberton's smile did not reach his eyes. "The contract your father signed says otherwise. I have already made arrangements. The ceremony will take place in San Antonio at my estate. You will, of course, relocate there permanently. This ranch will be absorbed into my holdings. This is my home." "It was your home," Pemberton corrected. "Soon it will be mine, along with everything else that belonged to your father, including you in the eyes of the law." He stepped closer, and Eleanor fought the urge to retreat. "I suggest you make peace with this arrangement, Miss Hartwell. I am not a patient man, but I can be generous to those who know their place. The threat in his words was barely concealed. Eleanor had heard stories about Pemberton, about how he acquired smaller ranches through intimidation and legal maneuvering, about the men who worked for him and the violence they were capable of. Looking at his cold eyes now, she believed every story. "Get off my property," she said. Pemberton's expression hardened. "Enjoy your independence while it lasts, Miss Hartwell. In 53 days you will learn what it means to be my wife." He replaced his hat and mounted his horse with practiced ease. "I will send word about the wedding arrangements. I expect you to be ready." Eleanor watched them ride away, her hands clenched so tightly her nails bit into her palms. She would not cry. She would not give in to despair. There had to be a way out of this nightmare, and she would find it. The next morning, Eleanor rode into Abilene with the contract folded in her saddlebag. The town was busy with the usual chaos of a cattle town. Drovers moving herds through the streets. Saloons already doing brisk business despite the early hour, merchants hawking their wares. She went directly to the office of Judge Samuel Morrison, a friend of her father's, hoping he might see some legal avenue she had missed. Judge Morrison read the contract carefully, his weathered face growing more grave with each paragraph. Finally, he set it down and removed his reading glasses, rubbing the bridge of his nose. "Eleanor, I wish I had better news. This contract is airtight. Your father's signature is witnessed and notarized. The terms are clear. Unless you can prove the signature is forged or that your father was not of sound mind when he signed it, you are bound by its terms." "He was sick," Eleanor said desperately. "Perhaps the fever had affected his judgment. The date on this contract is from 6 months before he took ill. At that time, everyone in town would testify that James Hartwell was as sharp as ever." The judge's expression was sympathetic. "I am sorry, Eleanor, I truly am. But unless you can prove fraud or duress, or unless Pemberton releases you from the agreement, you have no legal recourse." Eleanor felt the walls closing in. "So I must marry him or lose everything, or you run," the judge said quietly. "Leave Kansas, start fresh somewhere else. It would mean abandoning the ranch, but you would be free." The thought of running, of letting Pemberton take what her family had built, made Eleanor feel sick. But the thought of marrying him, of spending her life under his control, was somehow worse. She thanked the judge and left, her mind churning with impossible choices. She was walking back to where she had tied her horse when she collided with someone coming out of the general store. Strong hands caught her arms, steadying her, and she found herself looking up into the most striking blue eyes she had ever seen. "I apologize, ma'am," the man said, releasing her immediately. "I was not watching where I was going." He was young, probably close to her own age, with sun-bronzed skin and dark hair that touched his collar. He wore the dusty clothes of a working cowboy, trail-worn boots and a leather vest, and there was a gentle quality to his face that contrasted with the hardness she had seen in Pemberton's expression. "No harm done," Eleanor managed, suddenly aware that she had been staring. The cowboy retrieved the package he had dropped, then tipped his hat to her. "Have a good day, ma'am." He started to walk past, then paused, his eyes narrowing slightly. "Are you all right? You look troubled." Eleanor almost brushed off the concern, but something in his genuine expression made her hesitate. "I am managing," she said, which was not quite a lie but not the truth either. "Forgive me for being forward, but you do not look like you are managing. You look like someone carrying the weight of the world." He shifted the package under his arm. "I am Wyatt Cooper. I have just signed on at the Morrison Ranch for the season. If you need help with anything, ma'am, I would be honored to assist." The kindness in his offer nearly undid her composure. "Eleanor Hartwell," she said, extending her hand. His handshake was firm but gentle. "I appreciate the offer, Mr. Cooper, but I am afraid my troubles are beyond help." "I have found that very few troubles truly are," Wyatt said, "but I will not press you. The offer stands should you need it." He tipped his hat again and walked toward his horse, leaving Eleanor staring after him with an odd feeling in her chest. There had been something in his eyes, a steadiness that made her want to trust him, which was absurd given they had just met. She pushed the thought aside and mounted her own horse, riding back toward the ranch with no more answers than she had started with. Over the next week, Eleanor threw herself into the work of running the ranch, trying to lose herself in the familiar rhythms of feeding livestock, mending fences, and managing the few remaining ranch hands her father had employed. But the contract loomed over everything, a constant shadow that darkened even the brightest spring days. She was working on repairing a section of fence on the eastern boundary when she saw a rider approaching. For a moment her heart seized, thinking Pemberton had returned, but as the rider drew closer she recognized Wyatt Cooper. He dismounted when he reached her, looking slightly uncertain. "Miss Hartwell, I hope I am not intruding. I was riding the Morrison boundary and saw you working. Thought you might appreciate some help with that fence." Eleanor straightened, wiping sweat from her forehead with the back of her hand. "That is kind of you, Mr. Cooper, but I am managing." "I can see that," Wyatt said, his eyes taking in the work she had already completed. "But 2 sets of hands make lighter work, and I have some time before I am expected back." He did not wait for permission, just pulled off his gloves and moved to the next fence post that needed attention. They worked in companionable silence for a while, the sound of hammers and the creak of wire filling the warm afternoon air. Wyatt was efficient and skilled, his movements practiced and sure. Despite herself, Eleanor found her tension easing slightly. "You are good at this," she observed. Wyatt smiled. "Been working ranches since I was 14. My father had a small spread in Wyoming territory before he passed. After that, I have been moving around, working where the seasons take me. Do you not want your own place? Someday, maybe. But owning land is not as simple as working it. Takes capital, connections, luck." He paused in his work, looking out over the rolling Kansas prairie. "This is fine country, though. I can see why someone would want to hold on to it." Something in his tone made Eleanor look at him more carefully. "How much have you heard about my situation?" Wyatt met her eyes directly. "Some of the hands were talking, about your father's death, about some contract. I did not listen to most of the gossip, but I gathered you are in a difficult position." He hesitated. "If I am overstepping, tell me, but is someone trying to force you into something you do not want?" The directness of the question, combined with the genuine concern in his expression, broke through Eleanor's carefully maintained composure. To her horror, she felt tears threatening and she turned away, gripping the fence post hard enough that splinters bit into her palm. "I apologize," Wyatt said immediately. "I should not have asked. It is none of my business." "No," Eleanor said, her voice tight. "No, it is just that no one has asked me what I want. Not the lawyer, not the judge, not anyone." She took a shaky breath and turned back to face him. "My father signed a marriage contract before he died. I am supposed to marry a man named Clarence Pemberton in less than 50 days, or I lose this ranch. I never agreed to it. I never even knew about it until after my father was buried." Wyatt's expression darkened. "Pemberton. I have heard that name. He runs a large operation south of here, does he not?" "Yes, and he has made it clear that he expects me to honor the contract." Eleanor felt the anger rising again, hot and fierce. "I have looked for legal options. There are none. The contract is valid and I am trapped." "Show me," Wyatt said. Eleanor blinked. "What? The contract? Show it to me. Maybe there is something others have missed." It was a slim hope, but Eleanor found herself wanting to take it. They abandoned the fence work and rode back to the ranch house. Inside, Eleanor retrieved the contract from her father's desk and handed it to Wyatt. He read through it slowly, his brow furrowed in concentration. "This is remarkably one-sided," he said finally. "Your father agreed to the marriage and put up the ranch as collateral, but what did Pemberton agree to provide? There is no mention of financial settlement, no dowry arrangement, nothing that indicates what your father received in exchange for this agreement. Does that matter legally?" "I do not know, but it strikes me as odd." Wyatt continued reading, then stopped. "Wait," Look at this clause here. It says the marriage must take place within 60 days of your father's death and that you must go willingly to the ceremony. If you refuse to appear, Pemberton can claim the ranch, but the clause specifically states that he cannot compel you physically to attend. I already know I cannot be forced to marry him, Eleanor said, but refusing means losing everything. Wyatt was quiet for a long moment, his eyes still on the contract. Then he looked up at her with an expression that made her breath catch. What if there was a way to honor the letter of the contract without honoring its spirit? What do you mean? The contract says you must marry Pemberton or he can claim the ranch. But what if you were already married to someone else when the 60 days expire? The contract would be void because it would be impossible to fulfill. Pemberton might still try to claim the ranch as compensation, but without the marriage to legitimize his claim, it would be much harder for him to win in court. Eleanor stared at him. Are you suggesting I marry someone else? I am suggesting it as a possibility. Wyatt set the contract down carefully. It would need to be someone you could trust, someone who would agree to the arrangement and not try to take advantage of it, someone who would be willing to help you keep your ranch and your freedom. The implication hung in the air between them. Eleanor's heart was pounding so hard she was certain Wyatt could hear it. You are talking about yourself. I am offering, Wyatt said quietly. If you want, I have nothing to lose and no ties keeping me anywhere particular. If marrying me in name would save your ranch and your freedom, then I am willing to do it. We could make whatever arrangement you are comfortable with. After a suitable time, we could divorce if you wish, or maintain a partnership if that works better. I would not expect anything from you except honesty and fair dealing. Eleanor felt dizzy. They had known each other barely more than a week. This was insane. And yet, looking at Wyatt's steady gaze, at the genuine sincerity in his expression, she found herself actually considering it. Why would you do this? She asked. You barely know me. Because what Pemberton is doing is wrong, Wyatt said simply. Because you deserve to make your own choices about your life. And because sometimes the right thing to do is the crazy thing. He smiled slightly. Besides, I have been looking for a reason to stay in one place. Helping you seems like as good a reason as any. Eleanor walked to the window, looking out at the land she loved. 50 days. In 50 days, she would either be married to Clarence Pemberton, or she would have lost her home, or she would have taken the most reckless gamble of her life with a cowboy she barely knew. If we did this, she said slowly, not turning around, Pemberton would be furious. He might try to hurt you or sue you or worse. I have dealt with dangerous men before. You do not know what you are offering. I think I do. She heard Wyatt stand, heard his boots on the wooden floor as he crossed to stand behind her, not touching but close enough that she could feel his presence. Miss Hartwell, Eleanor, I am not a rich man. I have nothing to offer you except my word that I will not betray you, that I will help you keep what is yours, and that I will never try to control you the way Pemberton wants to. If that is enough, then say yes. If it is not, I will leave right now and never speak of this again. Eleanor turned to face him. In the golden afternoon light, Wyatt looked younger and older all at once, a man who had seen hardship but had not let it harden him. She thought about her options, about marrying Pemberton and losing herself, about running and losing her home, about taking this impossible risk with a stranger who had shown her more kindness in a week than her father had in his final year. Yes, she heard herself say. Yes, I will marry you. The wedding took place 3 days later in the small church in Abilene with Judge Morrison and the preacher's wife as witnesses. Eleanor wore her mother's dress, altered to fit her, and Wyatt wore the cleanest clothes he owned and a look of determined calm. The ceremony was brief and simple, and when the preacher pronounced them married, Wyatt kissed Eleanor's hand with a gentleness that made her throat tight. They filed the marriage certificate immediately, making sure it was properly recorded and dated. Judge Morrison shook both their hands with a knowing look in his eyes. I hope you two know what you are doing, he said. So do we, Wyatt replied. They rode back to the ranch in the late afternoon, and Eleanor felt a strange mix of relief and terror. She was married. To a man she had known for barely 2 weeks. A man who was now living in her house, sleeping in the guest room, sharing her meals. It was surreal and terrifying, and somehow, against all logic, it felt right. The explosion came a week later when Clarence Pemberton arrived at the ranch with 6 men and a lawyer of his own. Eleanor watched from the porch as they approached, Wyatt standing beside her, his hand resting casually on the pistol at his hip. Pemberton dismounted with barely controlled rage evident in every movement. "What is the meaning of this?" he demanded, waving a piece of paper that Eleanor recognized as a copy of her marriage certificate. "You were contracted to marry me." "I was never contracted to anything," Eleanor said, her voice steady. "My father made an agreement without my knowledge or consent. I have chosen to marry someone else." "You cannot do that. The contract is legally binding." "The contract required me to marry you," Wyatt said calmly. "It said nothing about her not being able to marry someone else first. The contract is void because it is now impossible to fulfill." Pemberton's face turned an alarming shade of red. "You will regret this, Cooper. Both of you. I will sue for breach of contract. I will take this ranch and everything on it. I will destroy you." "You can try," Eleanor said. "But you will find it much harder to win when the contract you are trying to enforce required me to marry you against my will." Public opinion tends to side with a young widow being protected by her new husband, rather than with a wealthy man trying to acquire property through coercion. It was a gamble, counting on public sentiment in a territory where women's rights were still limited, but Eleanor could see the calculation in Pemberton's eyes. A court battle would be expensive and public, and there was no guarantee he would win, especially without the legitimacy that the marriage would have provided. "This is not over," Pemberton snarled. He turned to his lawyer. "I want that contract enforced. Find a way." The lawyer, who had been reading through the contract during the exchange, looked uncomfortable. "Mr. Pemberton, I am not certain we have grounds. The contract specified marriage within 60 days, but it did not prevent her from marrying someone else during that time. The oversight is on our end." Pemberton's hand moved toward his gun, and suddenly Wyatt was between Eleanor and the other men, his own weapon drawn so fast she barely saw him move. "I would not," Wyatt said, his voice still calm but with an edge of steel beneath it. "You have 6 men with you, and maybe you could take me, but I promise you would not walk away from it, and then you would have murder charges on top of everything else." The moment stretched taut as a wire. Eleanor could hear her own heartbeat, could feel the tension radiating from every person in the yard. Finally, Pemberton let his hand fall away from his gun. "You have made powerful enemies today," he said. "Both of you, we will live with it," Eleanor replied. Pemberton and his men rode away, leaving dust and threats in their wake. Eleanor did not realize she was shaking until Wyatt gently took her arm and guided her back into the house. "He will try something else," Eleanor said, sinking into a chair. "He is not the type to let this go." "Probably not," Wyatt agreed. "But we bought ourselves time and we made it clear you are not alone. That counts for something." Over the following weeks, Eleanor discovered what it meant to have a partner. Wyatt threw himself into the work of the ranch with an enthusiasm and skill that impressed even the experienced hands her father had employed. He was up before dawn, working until dark, and never once treated Eleanor as anything less than an equal. They made decisions together, worked side by side, and slowly the ranch began to thrive in ways it had not even before her father's illness. But more than that, Eleanor found herself looking forward to their evenings together. After the work was done, they would sit on the porch, watching the sun set over the prairie, and talk. Wyatt told her about his childhood in Wyoming, about losing his parents and learning to make his way in the world. Eleanor shared memories of her mother, of growing up on the ranch, of dreams she had set aside when her father became ill. "Did you ever want to leave?" Wyatt asked one evening. "See what else was out there," Eleanor considered the question. "Sometimes." When I was younger, I thought about going east, maybe seeing the ocean. But this land is in my blood. I cannot imagine belonging anywhere else. I understand that. I have been moving for so long, I forgot what it felt like to belong somewhere. He looked at her, and in the fading light, his eyes were very blue. This is starting to feel like somewhere I could belong. Eleanor's breath caught. They had been married for nearly a month, but they had maintained a careful distance, both emotional and physical. They were partners, friends even, but they had not crossed the line into anything more. Now, looking at Wyatt in the twilight, Eleanor realized that somewhere along the way, she had started to want more. "Wyatt," she said softly. He turned to her, and she saw her own feelings reflected in his expression. "Eleanor, I need to tell you something. This arrangement, this marriage, it started as a way to help you, and I meant everything I said about not expecting anything from you. But I would be lying if I said my feelings had not changed." He reached out, his fingers barely brushing hers. "I am falling in love with you, and if you do not feel the same, that is all right. I will honor our agreement, but I needed you to know." Eleanor's heart felt like it might burst from her chest. "I feel it too," she whispered. "I have been trying not to because it seemed too fast, too impossible. But Wyatt, I think I have been falling in love with you since the moment you offered to help me with that fence." Wyatt stood and pulled her gently to her feet. "May I kiss you, really kiss you, not just as part of a legal arrangement, but because I want to?" "Yes," Eleanor breathed, and then his lips were on hers, gentle at first and then deeper, and it felt like coming home. She wrapped her arms around his neck, pressing closer, feeling the solid warmth of him, the way his hands settled on her waist like they belonged there. When they finally pulled apart, both breathless, Wyatt rested his forehead against hers. "I want this to be real," he said. "Not just a marriage on paper, but a real partnership, a real life together." "So do I," Eleanor said. "I want all of it, with you." That night their marriage became real in every sense. Wyatt carried Eleanor to her room, to the bed she had slept in alone for so long, and they came together with a tenderness and passion that left them both shaken. Afterward, lying tangled in the sheets with moonlight spilling through the window, Eleanor traced the scars on Wyatt's chest and felt a contentment she had never known was possible. "Thank you," she whispered. Wyatt pulled her closer. "For what?" "For seeing me, for helping me, for staying." "I am not going anywhere," Wyatt promised. "This is home now. You are home." The trouble they had been expecting came a month later, but not in the way they had anticipated. Eleanor was in town buying supplies when she heard shouting from the direction of the bank. She hurried over to find a crowd gathered, and pushed through to see Clarence Pemberton standing on the bank steps with several official-looking men in suits. "The mortgage on the Hartwell ranch is 3 months overdue," Pemberton was announcing loudly. "As the holder of that debt, I am foreclosing on the property effective immediately." Eleanor felt the bottom drop out of her world. "That is a lie. My father paid off the mortgage years ago," Pemberton smiled coldly. "Do you have proof of that, Mrs. Cooper?" "Because I have documentation showing a loan taken out 6 months ago with the ranch as collateral. The payments have not been made, which means the property now belongs to me." Eleanor's mind raced. 6 months ago, when her father was first getting sick, when he must have signed the marriage contract. He would not have taken out a mortgage without telling her, but then again, he had not told her about the contract either. She felt sick. "I want to see that documentation," she demanded. One of the suited men stepped forward. He was from the bank. Eleanor recognized him. "I have the paperwork here, Mrs. Cooper. Your father's signature is notarized and the terms are clear. Without payment, the bank has the right to foreclose. Mr. Pemberton purchased the debt yesterday." It was a trap. The whole thing had been a trap from the beginning. The marriage contract had been the obvious threat, the one she would focus on and fight against, while the real danger had been hidden in loan documents she had never known existed. Pemberton had been planning this for months, maybe longer. "How much?" Eleanor asked, her voice barely audible over the roaring in her ears. $3,000, Pemberton said. "Due immediately." It might as well have been $3 million. Eleanor did not have that kind of money. The ranch had livestock and land but no cash reserves, especially not after paying for her father's medical care and funeral expenses. She was going to lose everything after all. Then Wyatt was there, pushing through the crowd to stand beside her. "How long do we have to raise the funds?" The banker looked uncomfortable. "Typically, we would allow 30 days for debt settlement, but Mr. Pemberton has requested immediate foreclosure." "That is illegal," Wyatt said flatly. "Kansas law requires a minimum of 30 days' notice for foreclosure proceedings. If you proceed immediately, any court will overturn it." The banker paled. I suppose that is technically correct. So we have 30 days, Wyatt said. He looked at Pemberton. "We will have your money in 30 days with interest. And then I suggest you find somewhere else to conduct your business, because you are not welcome in this town anymore." Pemberton's smile was razor-sharp. 30 days, then. But when you fail to pay, Cooper, I will take everything. The ranch, the livestock, everything. And there will be nothing you can do about it." Wyatt took Eleanor's hand and led her away from the crowd. She was shaking, barely able to process what had just happened. When they were alone in the alley beside the general store, she turned to him. "We do not have $3,000. "We do not have anything close to that." "I know," Wyatt said, "but we have 30 days to find it." "How? There is no way we can raise that much money in a month." Wyatt was quiet for a moment, his expression thoughtful. "What if we sold some of the herd? We could do a quick drive to the railhead, get top price for the cattle." "The herd is not big enough. Even if we sold every head, we would maybe raise half of what we need, and then we would have no stock to rebuild with." "Then we find another way." Wyatt cupped her face in his hands, forcing her to meet his eyes. "Eleanor, listen to me. We are not giving up. We are not letting Pemberton win. We will find a way." His certainty steadied her. Eleanor took a deep breath and nodded. "All right, we find a way." They spent the next week exploring every option. They approached other banks about loans, but with the existing debt, no one would lend them money. They considered selling parcels of land, but there were no buyers willing to pay fair price on such short notice. They looked into selling equipment, livestock, anything of value, but the numbers never added up to $3,000. Eleanor was beginning to despair when an unexpected visitor arrived at the ranch. She was in the barn, mucking out stalls and trying not to cry from frustration, when she heard horses approaching. Fearing it was Pemberton or his men, she grabbed a pitchfork and stepped out into the yard, only to find herself face to face with a woman in her 60s with silver hair and sharp, intelligent eyes, accompanied by two cowboys who looked more like bodyguards than ranch hands. "Are you Eleanor Cooper?" the woman asked, dismounting with surprising agility. "I am," Eleanor said warily. "Who are you?" "Margaret Hartwell, your father's sister. I apologize for not coming sooner. I only just heard about James's passing." Eleanor stared. She had not seen her aunt in over 10 years, not since a bitter family argument had driven Margaret away. Her father had rarely spoken of his sister, and Eleanor had half forgotten she existed. "Why are you here now?" Eleanor asked. Margaret's expression softened. "Because I also heard about the trouble you are in. That snake Pemberton has been bragging all over the territory about how he is finally going to acquire the Hartwell Ranch. I thought you might need help." Before Eleanor could respond, Wyatt emerged from the house, alerted by the sound of visitors. Margaret's sharp eyes assessed him in an instant. "You must be the cowboy who married my niece and ruined Pemberton's plans. Good for you, young man." Despite everything, Eleanor felt a smile tug at her lips. "Aunt Margaret, this is my husband, Wyatt Cooper. Wyatt, this is my aunt." Margaret shook Wyatt's hand with a firm grip. "I will get straight to the point. I heard about the mortgage and the foreclosure. I am prepared to loan you the money you need to pay off Pemberton with very favorable terms." Eleanor's hopes surged, then crashed. "I appreciate the offer, but we cannot pay you back either. We have been trying to raise the funds, but there is no way." "I did not ask how you would pay me back," Margaret said. "I said the terms were favorable. Here is what I propose. I loan you $3,000. You pay me back over the next 10 years with minimal interest, and in exchange, I get to spend my remaining years living on this ranch, the place I grew up and never should have left. James and I were fools to let pride separate us. I would like to come home if you will have me." Eleanor felt tears spring to her eyes. "You would do that. You are family, Eleanor, and from what I hear, you are the best of us. I am not going to let some carpetbagger steal what your mother and father built." Margaret pulled out a bank draft from her coat. "I stopped by the bank in Abilene on my way here. This is a certified draft for $3,500. The extra $500 is to make sure you have a cushion. Take it." Eleanor took the draft with shaking hands, unable to speak. Wyatt put his arm around her shoulders and she leaned into him, overwhelmed by the sudden reversal of fortune. "Thank you," she finally managed. "Aunt Margaret, I do not know what to say." "Say you will let an old woman come home. That is all the thanks I need." The next day, Eleanor and Wyatt rode into Abilene with Margaret and the bank draft. They went directly to the bank, where they presented the draft to the banker and demanded the immediate settlement of the debt. The banker tried to hedge, saying he needed to contact Pemberton first, but Wyatt made it clear that the law required them to accept payment regardless of what the debt holder wanted. Within an hour, the mortgage was paid in full, and Eleanor held the proof of payment in her hands. The ranch was truly hers again, free and clear. They filed the payment with the county clerk to make it official, and then Eleanor did something she had been thinking about since the moment Wyatt had first offered to help her. She pulled out the original marriage contract from her bag, the one her father had signed, the one that had started this entire nightmare. Without a word, she walked to the potbelly stove in the corner of the clerk's office and threw it in. The paper caught immediately, flames consuming the ink and signatures, turning obligation and coercion into ash. Eleanor watched it burn, feeling lighter with each passing second. When the last corner of the contract had disintegrated, she turned to Wyatt, who had been watching her with an expression of fierce pride. "It is done," she said. "Really done." "Not quite," Wyatt said. He reached into his own pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. "That first marriage, the one we did to save the ranch, that was about survival. This is about something else." He dropped to one knee right there in the clerk's office, ignoring the curious stares of the office workers. "Eleanor Hartwell Cooper, I fell in love with you the first moment I saw you, though I did not realize it until later. You are the strongest, most courageous woman I have ever met. You are my partner, my best friend, and the person I want to spend the rest of my life with. I know we are already married, but I want to do this right. Will you marry me again, not because you have to, but because you want to? Will you let me love you and stand beside you and build a life with you for real?" Eleanor was crying openly now, and she did not care who saw. "Yes. Yes, absolutely yes." Wyatt slid the ring onto her finger. It was simple silver with a small turquoise stone, nothing fancy, but to Eleanor it was more beautiful than any diamond. He stood and kissed her, and she heard someone in the office sigh happily. When they pulled apart, Eleanor looked at the ring, then at Wyatt, then at the stove where the contract had burned. "We should tell Pemberton ourselves. I want to see his face when he realizes he lost." They found Pemberton at the Cattlemen's Association office exactly where they expected. He looked up when they entered, and his expression shifted from surprise to anger in an instant. "What do you want, Cooper? Come to beg for more time?" "No," Eleanor said pleasantly. "We came to show you this." She placed the receipt for the paid mortgage on his desk. "The debt is settled. You have no claim on our ranch, no leverage, and no power over us. We also wanted you to know that we burned the marriage contract. It is gone, along with any illusions you might have had about controlling me or my property." Pemberton's face went through several shades of red before settling on a mottled purple. "You think this is over? You think you have won?" "I know we have," Eleanor said. "And if you try anything else, legal or otherwise, we will make sure everyone in the territory knows exactly what you tried to do. How you tried to trap a grieving daughter into marriage through a contract she never agreed to. How you used forged or coerced documents to try to steal land. How you are nothing but a bully and a coward who cannot build anything on his own merit. Those are serious accusations, Pemberton said, but there was uncertainty in his voice now. And true ones, Wyatt added. We have already spoken to Judge Morrison. He is very interested in investigating how you came by that mortgage debt and whether proper procedures were followed. I suspect he will find some very interesting irregularities. Pemberton looked between them, and Eleanor saw the moment he realized he was beaten. His shoulders slumped slightly, the fight going out of him. Get out of my office. Gladly, Eleanor said, and stay away from our ranch, our town, and our lives. If I see you on my property again, I will have you arrested for trespassing. They left Pemberton stewing in his office and walked out into the bright Kansas sunshine. Eleanor felt like she could breathe fully for the first time in months. The nightmare was over. She was free. Over the following months, life settled into a rhythm that felt almost miraculous in its normalcy. Margaret proved to be a wonderful addition to the household, taking over much of the cooking and household management that Eleanor had been struggling to keep up with while running the ranch. The older woman had a sharp wit and a talent for organization, and within weeks, the ranch was running more smoothly than it ever had. Wyatt continued to prove himself invaluable, not just as a worker but as a true partner. He and Eleanor made every major decision together, debating and discussing until they found solutions they both agreed on. The ranch began to prosper, their herd growing, their reputation for quality livestock spreading throughout the territory. But more than the material success, Eleanor found herself falling more deeply in love with her husband every day. Wyatt made her laugh with his dry humor and silly stories. He listened when she needed to talk and knew when she needed silence. He challenged her when she was being stubborn and supported her when she was right. He was everything she had never known to hope for in a partner. One evening in late summer, they were sitting on the porch watching the sunset when Wyatt suddenly became serious. I have been thinking, he said, about making this ranch more official. Not just the Hartwell ranch with me working here, but our ranch, together. I want to add my name to the deed alongside yours, true partners in everything. Eleanor was touched by the gesture. You know that everything I have is already yours legally. I know, but I want it to be clear that this is ours, that we are building this together, that it is not your family legacy that I am living off of, but our shared future. I would like that, Eleanor said softly. The Cooper Ranch, or maybe the Hartwell Cooper Ranch, I like the sound of that. They amended the deed the following week, making them equal partners in the ranch. It felt like another layer of commitment, another way of saying that they were in this together for the long haul. That fall, Eleanor discovered she was pregnant. The realization came one morning when she was feeling particularly queasy, and Margaret took one look at her and started smiling. How long have you known? Margaret asked. Known what? That you are carrying a child. Eleanor sat down heavily. She had been so focused on the ranch, on building their life together, that she had not even noticed the signs. But now that Margaret had said it, she recognized the symptoms her mother had described years ago. Her hand went to her stomach, and she felt a surge of joy and terror in equal measure. I need to tell Wyatt, she said. She found him in the barn, repairing tack, and the moment he saw her face, he set down his work and came to her. What is wrong? Nothing is wrong. Everything is wonderful. Eleanor took his hands and placed them on her stomach. Wyatt, we are going to have a baby. She watched his expression change from confusion to understanding to pure, unfiltered joy. He lifted her and spun her around, laughing, before setting her down gently and kissing her with a tenderness that made her cry. We are having a baby, he repeated, wonder in his voice. Eleanor, we are going to be parents. Are you happy? Happy does not even begin to cover it. He knelt and pressed his forehead to her stomach. Hello in there, little one. I am your father, and I promise to love you and protect you and teach you everything I know. You are going to have the best life. Eleanor ran her fingers through his hair, feeling overwhelmed with love for this man who had come into her life as a stranger and become her entire world. The pregnancy progressed smoothly, and as Eleanor's belly grew, so did the excitement in the household. Margaret took over even more of the physical work, insisting that Eleanor rest and take care of herself. Wyatt became almost comically protective, hovering whenever Eleanor did anything more strenuous than walking across the room. "I am pregnant, not fragile," Eleanor laughed one day when Wyatt tried to stop her from climbing the stairs. "I know. I just want to make sure you are safe, both of you." "We are safe, we are happy. Stop worrying." But she loved him for worrying anyway. In early spring of 1879, nearly a year after she had first learned about the marriage contract, Eleanor went into labor. It was a long, difficult process that left Wyatt pacing holes in the floor while Margaret and the midwife worked with Eleanor. When the baby finally arrived, squalling and pink and perfect, Wyatt was allowed into the room. "It is a boy," Eleanor said tiredly, holding the tiny bundle against her chest. "We have a son." Wyatt sat carefully on the edge of the bed, staring at the baby with an expression of absolute awe. "He is perfect. You are perfect. I love you both so much." They named him James, after Eleanor's father, with the middle name William after Wyatt's father. Baby James had dark hair like his father and his mother's determination, making his presence known with lusty cries whenever he wanted something. Parenthood was exhausting and wonderful and terrifying all at once. Eleanor marveled at how something so small could take up so much space in their lives and hearts. Wyatt proved to be a natural father, patient and gentle, rocking James through the night when he could not sleep, changing diapers without complaint, and singing silly songs that made the baby coo. Watching Wyatt with their son, Eleanor sometimes had to pinch herself to believe this was her life. Just over a year ago, she had been trapped and desperate, staring at a contract that would have stolen her future. Now she had a husband she loved deeply, a healthy baby, a thriving ranch, and the freedom to make her own choices. It felt like a miracle. As James grew from infant to toddler, the ranch continued to prosper. They expanded their herd, hired more hands, and even began breeding horses, which Wyatt had a particular talent for. The Hartwell Cooper Ranch became known throughout Kansas as a model operation, and Eleanor and Wyatt's partnership became legendary in its own right. People spoke admiringly of the young couple who worked side by side, who treated their employees fairly, and who had overcome incredible odds to build their life together. One afternoon when James was 2 years old, Eleanor was in the kitchen with Margaret preparing dinner when her aunt said something that made her pause. "You know, I heard that Clarence Pemberton lost most of his holdings last year. Turned out several of his land acquisitions were based on fraudulent documents, and when it all came out, the courts seized his property. He left Texas in disgrace." Eleanor felt a momentary satisfaction, then let it go. Pemberton was part of her past, and she refused to give him space in her present. "I hope he finds peace somewhere," she said, and meant it. Carrying anger would only poison her own happiness. That evening, as she watched Wyatt play with James in the yard, the setting sun painting everything gold, Eleanor reflected on the strange path her life had taken. The contract that was meant to trap her had instead led her to freedom. The cowboy who had seemed like a stranger had become the love of her life. The future she had feared had transformed into something better than anything she could have imagined. Wyatt looked up and caught her watching. He smiled, that same gentle smile that had first made her trust him, and held out his hand. Eleanor went to him, and he pulled her close, James between them, their little family complete. "What are you thinking about?" Wyatt asked. "About how sometimes the worst things lead to the best things. About how grateful I am that you walked out of that general store at exactly the right moment. About how much I love this life we have built." "Me too," Wyatt said. "Every single day I wake up grateful that you said yes to my crazy proposal." "It was not that crazy," Eleanor teased. "Unconventional, maybe, but not crazy." "It was completely crazy," Wyatt laughed. "But I would do it again in a heartbeat." James tugged on Eleanor's skirt, demanding attention in the way only a 2-year-old could, and they both laughed, swept back into the beautiful chaos of family life. Years passed in the way that happy years do, both quickly and slowly, full of work and love and the small joys that make up a life. Eleanor and Wyatt had 2 more children, a daughter named Sarah and another son named Thomas. The ranch grew and evolved, adapting to changing markets and technologies while staying true to its roots. Margaret lived to see all 3 of her great-nieces and nephews born, and passed away peacefully in her sleep at the age of 74, content in the knowledge that she had come home and helped save the family legacy. They buried her on the hill beside Eleanor's parents, overlooking the land she had loved. Wyatt proved to be as steady and loving a father to 3 as he had been to 1, and Eleanor watched her children grow up with the kind of security and freedom she had nearly lost. She taught them to ride and rope and manage the ranch, while Wyatt taught them to be kind and honest and to stand up for what was right. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Wyatt surprised Eleanor by taking her into town, where he had arranged for a jeweler to create a new wedding band for her, this one engraved with a simple message: "From contract to choice to love." "I wanted you to have something that represents our real story," he said as he slid it onto her finger. "Not the marriage we had to make, but the one we chose to build." Eleanor kissed him, there in the middle of the jewelry shop, not caring who saw. "It is perfect. You are perfect." "This life is perfect." "Not perfect," Wyatt corrected gently, "but ours, and that is better." As they rode back to the ranch that evening, Eleanor thought about the contract that had started everything, the document that had seemed like the end of her dreams but had somehow led to their fulfillment. She thought about the moment Wyatt had suggested they burn it, the liberating feeling of watching it turn to ash, and the freedom that came from choosing her own path. The ranch spread out before them in the fading light, familiar and beloved. Somewhere in the house, their children were probably driving the hired housekeeper crazy, demanding stories before bed. In the barn, the horses Wyatt had trained were settling in for the night. In the fields, the cattle grazed peacefully. It was an ordinary evening on an ordinary ranch, and it was everything Eleanor had ever wanted. Wyatt reached over and took her hand as they rode, their fingers interlacing with the ease of long practice. No words were needed. They had built something real and true out of desperation and chance, and it had become the foundation of a life neither of them would trade for anything. The sun set over the Kansas prairie, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink and purple, and Eleanor and Wyatt rode home together, toward the future they had chosen, toward the love they had found, toward the life they were still building with every passing day. The contract that had threatened to define her had burned to ash and been forgotten, replaced by vows spoken freely, promises kept willingly, and a love that had grown from the most unlikely of beginnings into something that would last a lifetime. Years later, when their children asked how Eleanor and Wyatt had met, they would tell the story honestly, about the contract and the desperate gamble and the cowboy who had offered to help a stranger. They would talk about how sometimes the bravest thing you can do is trust someone when you have every reason not to. How sometimes the craziest plans are the ones that work out best, and how true love is not about grand gestures, but about showing up every day and choosing each other again and again. And they would end the story the same way every time, with Wyatt pulling Eleanor close and saying, "The best decision I ever made was walking out of that general store at exactly the right moment to run into your mother." To which Eleanor would add, "And the best decision I ever made was saying yes when a cowboy I barely knew offered to marry me to save my ranch." And their children would groan and laugh and roll their eyes the way children do, not yet understanding that someday they would tell their own children this story, about how their grandparents built a legacy not on contracts and obligations, but on choice and love and the courage to trust in each other when everything seemed impossible. The Hartwell Cooper Ranch would continue for generations, a testament to what two people could build when they worked together, when they chose love over fear, when they burned the contracts that tried to define them and wrote their own future instead. And at the heart of it all, remembered in family stories and preserved in old photographs, would be Eleanor and Wyatt, the woman who refused to be trapped and the cowboy who helped her fly free, who found in each other not just salvation but home, not just partnership but love, not just survival but a life worth living. On warm summer evenings, their great-grandchildren would sit on that same porch where Eleanor and Wyatt had first confessed their love, and they would look out over the same land, and they would understand that some stories are worth remembering, some loves are worth celebrating, and some legacies are built not on paper contracts, but on the promises two people make to each other when they choose love freely, honestly, and forever. And somewhere, perhaps the spirit of that burned contract would rest easy, knowing that its destruction had not ended a story but begun one, not trapped two souls but set them free to find each other. And that sometimes the best thing that can happen to an unjust agreement is for someone brave enough to reduce it to ashes and start again with truth, honesty, and love.